Welcome, Alice. Thank you so much for joining us in this conversation of change by Climate Asia. Uh, I'll just do a brief introduction of our guest today in this conversation of change. Alice Calro. Alice is an emerging global thought leader in science-aligned corporate sustainability, providing practical guidance on science-aligned business transformations and urging corporations to take on a systems leadership role in order to help secure a just and livable future for all. Thank you so much for joining today, Alice. So this conversation is going to be about your thoughts around uh, the career trajectory in climate action or broadly in the space of sustainability, and your observations and opinions and experience that you have from in the industry. So if you could share a little bit about that, it will be very useful for our audience. So my first question would be about your personal career trajectory on how you have seen the whole expectations towards the work culture that has evolved for many individuals who are looking to transition into purpose-driven jobs, and how, with a focus on work-life balance, many of the people who are looking to transition into purpose-filled jobs, how is it in comparison to the conventional jobs that we call as CSR jobs, or now we are calling climate jobs as more purposeful jobs. So how has been your personal career trajectory working in this space?
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Kaushik, for having me. Thank you for the great question. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and hopefully there will be some meaningful and inspiring bits for people to take away. I will start, like you asked, very briefly some of my journey so far. So I have since a very young age demonstrated what I call natural systems thinking, as in like systems thinking that I haven't studied, as well as business acumen, leadership, and high competence. And because of this, I have managed to pretty much straight from my studies enter into business generalist managerial roles, typically devising business strategies, business transformation roadmaps, linking strategy to execution through business performance management systems and things like that. And working in these roles, always reporting to the C-suite or eventually actually joining the C-suite, I observed a common pattern behind kind of the challenges the organizations were facing. And it would be often either short-termism, a short-term view, or insufficient regard for one's stakeholders, stakeholders other than the owners and shareholders, to be precise, or a poor understanding of the shareholders' needs and their expectations. Yes. And so this background combined with kind of my own personal search for a purpose-driven career, and of course also the influence of living in India at this point for 5.5 years or so, these influences have catapulted me into corporate sustainability consulting. And once I joined corporate sustainability consulting and I educated myself in that space, I have again fairly quickly observed that the mainstream practices were essentially completely unfit for purpose, and what I like to call detached from attaining real world sustainability, focus on real world as in like the outer world we actually live in. And the main gap being that attaining real world sustainability from our current starting position of severe ecological overshoot and severe injustices that are baked into our current system, the only way we can attain real world sustainability is actually through a so-called immediate radical systems change. Yes. And so once I had this realization, I decided to undertake sort of a recalibration process where I wanted to align my own livelihood with this imperative, as well as help shift maybe the whole industry, the sustainability consulting industry, and corporate sustainability inside organizations. Yes. And I think some of what I say also resonates with other people looking for either purpose-driven jobs or who have already landed in similar jobs. And in a way, now this is speaking about the attitudes and the expectations and so on, right? In a way, these expectations of those professionals working in purpose-driven jobs or looking to get into those jobs, they reflect the larger trends in the knowledge economy overall. Yes, people want to work in jobs that are meaningful for organizations that deliver something meaningful to the world. They want to work from home. They want to work in 4-day work weeks. They want to work in inclusive environments. They want to show up whole into the job as a whole person. They want to be treated like a person and so on and so forth. They want their values to be respected. And there's also things they don't want, right? They don't want to be, for example, lying to their clients or consumers, and they don't want to be forced to take other, unethical actions that injure their sense of integrity. And now this is, I think, the overall trend that we're seeing everywhere, right? And it's resulting in the so-called conscious quitting and so on and so forth. And when it comes to purpose-driven jobs, especially I'll speak about corporate sustainability, the paradox is that the gap between expectation and reality is even bigger. Yeah, it is much more pronounced, actually. So most people who enter these jobs, it's not just about doing something meaningful. They sort of explicitly enter these jobs because they want to make the world a better place, right? They might not use this exact phrase. The phrase may be something different, such as, saving the planet or saving nature or animals or so, or whatever else it may be, but it's ultimately making the world a better place, right? And in corporate sustainability and in corporate sustainability consulting, this is actually in sharp contrast to, again, what the mainstream actually is. Like the mainstream jobs really, you could say, boil down to enabling greenwashing. And that's obviously not what people are signing up for. And it results in a lot of frustration that is really, really palpable, in a lot of looking for alternatives and yearning for working with integrity. Yes, and I just, as a side note, I am getting a lot of messages on LinkedIn from people exactly in that situation, exactly in the position of the frustration, the disgust with this exact gap, and looking for what else could I do, where else could I do, how can I actually make good on this intention of mine, right, to make the world a better place. Yes, and so I think all of this will eventually lead to a kind of reckoning, and it may be quite interesting to watch.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. I think the purpose-driven jobs, again, like you worked in the whole corporate sustainability space and you're still working in there. And this is a space which is fast emerging. And what are some of the philosophical differences you see from the current and emerging paradigms in the space? That's one question. The other question is also about the differences or the perspectives, both from the global north and global south. How does that differ when we talk about corporate sustainability?
Okay. So from what I have seen, the current dominant paradigm in corporate sustainability, no matter where you are, is pretty much the global north paradigm over the past, 15, as in like a paradigm that has developed in the global north over the past 15 to 20 years or so. And to begin with, like describing this paradigm, it is one that is, and I will kind of be elaborating more on the gap that I mentioned earlier. It is a paradigm where corporate sustainability is completely divorced from what available sciences tell us. It is divorced from any sense of ethics, of like that purpose of doing no harm. It is very happy to look away from systemic exploitation, especially of supply chain workers and especially of the global south in general. It has no ambition to change the world. And in companies, it is pretty much pushed into the corner from which it can serve the business in the sense that sustainability becomes about sustaining the business. Yes, not about sustaining the real world and its needs. And in consulting, it's really downgraded to what major accounting and auditing firms can easily make money out of, right? And that is really selling management of compliance with an ever more complicated systems of norms and requirements for public disclosures, and about essentially managing perceptions of how your own unsustainable core business is perceived by the stakeholders outside. right? That's actually the dominant paradigm. And now when it comes to global south, so I have to admit, I'm not really qualified to talk about original global south approaches. Like where I am on my own journey right now is actually really starting to fully explore them and acknowledge them and familiarize myself with them. But there's a couple of things I would like to comment on when it comes to alternative paradigms and approaches. Yes, and the first one of them is indigenous peoples' wisdoms. That is something I have already had a chance to, familiarize myself with more. And so I would like to compare this again. If you compare contrast, yes, if you look at the mainstream paradigm, again, the kind of global north mainstream paradigm in corporate sustainability, it's underpinned by the dominant worldview that kind of came from European Christian Enlightenment era, and that is humans are separate and independent from nature and from any other living beings, and they are meant to dominate and conquer and transform some imaginary wilderness. And therefore, all other beings are created for us to be, to exploit them and to take advantage of them. And as a side note, obviously, when I say this, and I say what humans are meant to do, in that view, it really means a very limited set of humans, right? The ones with the right skin tone and the right gender and the right religion and so on and so forth. Yeah, and so it's really a paradigm that is fully oriented towards extracting, exploiting, destroying, and converting everything possible into as much money as possible, no matter the cost and no matter who's going to pay the cost. Yes. Now, if you actually put it side by side with the indigenous people's worldviews, yeah, so they are so deeply rooted in actually seeing and recognizing the interdependence of all life, as seeing ourselves as part of and kin with a larger whole. And therefore, the focus is on mutually beneficial, mutually nourishing, respectful relationships, and nobody ever takes more than one needs from the larger whole, right? And this is why these approaches are, as they are much more regenerative in nature or by design. And they're also, interestingly, much more aligned with our modern science. Like if you look at what quantum physics tell us about how the world exists and operates, it is actually much more aligned with these indigenous systems than with, again, our mainstream paradigm, with the principles by which we operate. Yes, and the second thing I wanted to comment on is like the dynamic between the global north, global south, and this will be specifically from my experience living in India, working in corporate sustainability in India. Organizations in India, given that again, sustainability in the mainstream sense, corporate sustainability in the mainstream sense is kind of new to India. They look for guidance mainly to major consulting firms. And these major consulting firms share global knowledge bases. And therefore, what they actually serve these Indian firms is, again, focus on compliance, on perceptions management, and on sustaining business as usual, while completely ignoring, again, what we know about the ecological collapse and the injustices in the inherent economic system, right? And the interesting thing is that, first of all, this approach actually anyways doesn't work. It doesn't work for organizations. Yeah, it's sort of a failed paradigm. You can't attain business sustainability in the sense that your business will not be sustainable in the sense of tenable forever and being able to create shareholder value for the future if you're using this paradigm as one thing. You will not be immune to risks. You will actually be left with eventually with nothing but greenwashing in your toolkit. Yeah, so it's actually adopting a system that doesn't work. But the most important thing, actually the more important thing is that, and I personally struggle to accept this, is that India sort of now is at the point of having an opportunity to not repeat the mistakes that the global north has made in corporate sustainability in the past 15 years, right? And which I just mentioned. And it has this option to not actually co-opt a model that is specifically designed to advocate and sustain the system, which existentially depends on exploitation of the global south.
Right.
Yeah, that's the irony in it. And it could therefore leapfrog to what I call sustainability as the world needs and business as the world needs. It could just leapfrog to much more, approaches that have much more integrity in them, and again, alignment with science and ethics and so on and so forth. And that are probably, even though I'm saying leapfrog, it's kind of into the future, but maybe it's leapfrogging into things that are much more inspired by the past again, and by things that have been there before. And unfortunately, that's not the trajectory that we are on right now. Yes.
Right. No, I really like how you articulated about fundamentally the understanding of how sustainability is looked at for a business, and how it is seen as sustainability of the business and not really factoring in the sustainability of the planet or of the nature. There's a whole narrative of separation from the nature.
Yes.
I think in your recent article that you have penned around planetary ikigai, and I think that's an interesting concept you have introduced, and the article talks about how the business and sustainability leaders need to grasp about the planetary ikigai, and like you explained about various different aspects of it. I think it would be great to hear from you. How is it and why is it important for corporate sustainability leaders to embrace this kind of mindset? And if you could also share some resources that can be explored around this a little more on this particular concept that you have introduced.
Great, thank you. So I'll speak a little bit about the concept. As an introduction to that, a couple of notes. One of them is that I mentioned in the introduction, kind of as part of my own recalibration towards actually making it my job to do what the world needs. This concept, introducing this concept, is kind of in that bucket of helping the industry shift towards what the world needs. Like, and by that I would mean like the corporate sustainability consulting industry, but also the discipline within organizations or the function and the agenda within organizations. Yes, and one more point as an introduction. The ikigai is actually a misnomer here. It's like an incorrectly applied label. I have been corrected after publishing the article and after about 350,000 people saw the article, that the Venn diagram that I adapted is actually not representative of the original Japanese ikigai concept. It is representative of a so-called purpose framework by, I believe, Andres Suzunaga, and I may be like butchering his name, and I apologize for that. And so, but it's actually this Venn diagram, which is actually the purpose diagram, that is mostly, as in by most people in the world think this is the ikigai diagram, and so did I. And so the purpose here was to actually take something that take a concept that a lot of people are familiar with, even though it is typically used for finding like one's own sense of purpose, like an individual's purpose in life, and adapting it to actually organizations, corporate sustainability agendas, and corporate sustainability consulting to really give people a shortcut for assessing the gap between where they are and where they want to be, or where they need to be, where the world needs us to be. And so the original Venn diagram actually has 4 circles, which is what the world needs, obviously, what you can get paid for, what you're good at, and what you love. Yeah, and in the middle of those is what your purpose should be. And for the purpose of applying this in the kind of organizational context and the corporate sustainability agendas, I've added one more circle, which is what causes harm. And that's exactly because you don't want to be only looking at where we want to be, we want to be also looking at where are we now and how the two compare. And if you read that article and you look at the diagrams that come there, you will find out that pretty much whichever of the layers you look at as an organization, as corporate sustainability agendas, or the consulting part, the mainstream has just no overlap with what the world needs, with what the world needs circle. And that's really that's really an illustration of the gap, of the big gap. And it also, apart from showing like sort of how miserable our starting point is, it also shows us both the ethical and business imperatives ahead of us. Yes, and so meaning the risks and opportunities of aligning or not aligning with aligning or not aligning what we do in our jobs or as organizations, again, with what the world needs. In the context of the economy, which is one way or the other going to shrink to operate within the planetary boundaries, and in the context of us potentially hitting social tipping points, which will hopefully make the kind of mainstream, again, laden in injustice, completely socially unacceptable. Yes. And so if you apply this concept to your either organization or sustainability agenda, you can again see where you are, where you need to be. And the crux of the message, or the crux of the conclusion really, is that unless you are actively orchestrating an immediate radical systems change, you're not even scratching the surface of corporate sustainability. Yes.
Right.
You've asked about some other sources. Yes, I'll just super briefly mention. So first of all, in the months to come, I will myself be publishing some additional supplementary resources to help apply the concept in practice. Second, in the meantime, there's a couple of books by Jason Hickel, The Great Divide and Less is More, that I would recommend to anyone who wants to like start aligning or actually seeing like, again, how unsustainable or how desperate the starting point is and where we might want to go. There is also going to be a foundational training series that I'm co-authoring with And Now What that's going to launch later in June. And part of it is going to specifically be focusing on applying this diagram. And other than that, on the level of if people want to do their own sort of like recalibration, undertake their own personal transformation, then R3.0, a global nonprofit I'm also loosely associated with, they have their transformation journey program. Rebase, another initiative, they also have a similar personal transformation program for business leaders that is also focused on giving you some of the foundations for transforming business and driving systems change. And also, I would like to mention another online course, Introduction to Decolonial Sustainability by The Possible Futures. I think all of those are aiming in a similar direction. Yeah.
Right. Excellent, Alice. Thank you for sharing those resources. And also going back to talking about, like you mentioned about orchestrating large-scale systems change, and again, coming back to the context of corporate sustainability playing its role in potentially, kind of transforming and contributing to the systems change. So in the context of creating a livable future without exploiting global south, so and on that path of transformation, so what kind of challenges do you see for the ecosystem?
Yes, before I go into the answer, I just really want to add to the point that you just said, right? Creating a livable future without exploiting the global south. This is one thing that is a personal trigger for me. Not what you said, but the part about creating a livable future or a future for global generation. Sorry, a future for a livable future for future. A livable future for future generations. Yeah, because this narrative is like prevalent everywhere out there. And that itself shows you how the paradigm is actually coming from the global north, right? Because it's speaking about either some imaginary future generations, or it's speaking about like our children and things like that, and what conditions will they live in. And it completely ignores the fact that the vast majority of the global south is right now completely denied just meeting their basic needs and any dignity and so on and so forth, and not by accident, but it being by design, it being a design feature of the current economic system, without which the global economy cannot keep going, and without which most of our business models cannot keep going. So I just really appreciate that you pointed that part out. Okay, so coming back to your question, the challenges in orchestrating a systems change, right? So I think there are a few that you will encounter, that everybody will encounter, yes. And the first one, and probably the most obvious and biggest one, or largest one in the beginning, is the oblivion, in the sense that, or lack of awareness, meaning that the majority of the global population has no idea that, without an immediate radical systems change, there will be no livable future, and maybe also no idea that, again, the majority of the world is actually being actively exploited, and it's part of the system. Like the system can't run without it, and they have bought into the misinformation and disinformation that is obviously coming at them left, right, and center. Yeah, so that's obviously one barrier. Another one is I believe called implicative denial. And that is essentially like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I'm really busy with my life, with my job, and with my household, and with my family, and with my health, and whatever else, and therefore I can't kind of be bothered to further reflect on and elaborate on thinking of like what the systems change might mean and how I might contribute to it. And the ironic part about this is obviously that you might be busy working on money to pay your mortgage, where your mortgage might be quite irrelevant by the time you pay it off, right? And the last one would be is that in terms of barriers, that for people who maybe pass the first two barriers and they really are opening up to the information, opening up to the implications, is that just the information is so far-reaching, and so like the need of the the action required is like, or the challenge is so enormous that it essentially becomes very overwhelming and scary and so on, and it just results in paralysis. Yeah, these are actually extremely common. Yes. And so how would you address, or how would you overcome the part of that oblivion and denial, right? So obviously educate yourself as much as you can, and through that, learn to differentiate which voices out there are sharing valid messages and augment those voices as much as you can. Second, if you are so predisposed, if you kind of have to give to it, help translate the message about, again, this immediate urgency and so on, the severity of the situation, into something that is more understandable for more audiences. And that's actually, you see exactly the Planetary Ikigai is an example of that. Yeah, that you just serve the same information in a slightly different language and a slightly different concept that people just find much more accessible. I think that's extremely important. Yes. And through creating this awareness, you create kind of that cognitive dissonance, and that's very important, because that comes to the part of the difficulty of processing the information. Like I would have again a few points there. One of them is whether it's you who has the cognitive dissonance or somebody else who's suffering from the dissonance, meaning from the gap of, I see this is what the world needs, and then this is what I do on my day job. That gap, yeah, that's again exactly what we started the conversation with. Yeah, so try to channel this as much as possible into action. It is actually quite therapeutical. It's quite healing. You do this by realizing that you have more agency than you realize, and it allows you to regain integrity. And I have to put a disclaimer here, it's heavily dependent on your level of privilege. Yes, obviously. So the more you are existentially dependent on your current job and you're not losing the job, and the more your current job is in a heavily policed environment, then obviously the less you will be able to do that. But the more so, this is a call on all of those who are not working in heavily policed environments and who are maybe not terribly desperate, like what might happen if I lose my job, or if I might have to look for another job. It's kind of first and foremost their responsibility, yeah, to again channel the cognitive dissonance into action, any kind of action that's useful. Yeah. And second, yes, I mentioned that one. Another one is to be actually modeling the alternative for others. Yeah, again, in any way you can, as much as you can, again, proportionally to your privilege, just be modeling an alternative to living in this gap. Yeah. And the last one would be actually surround yourself, or actually find at least someone who is qualified to handle that emotional processing of the situation. Yeah, and again, if you actually have the privilege, there are people doing specialized coaching and mentoring for exactly this kind of situation. If you do not have the privilege, which is obviously the majority of us, then seek out peer-to-peer support groups. There's online communities that you can look up where people, one, obviously share their experiences, but also share support and tips and guidance and so on and so forth. Yes. And okay, I don't know if there was any sub-question after that, or if I've answered everything.
Yeah, no, I think this answers the question, and I hope all of this is factored into how the whole work around corporate sustainability is evolving. And I think Alice, like you worked as a sustainability strategist and consultant for many years now, and now your focus is on making science aligned and socially just sustainability access, right, to business leaders, and you are starting off something on that. And like, how do you see the future outlook of the whole sustainability consulting evolving the coming years?
Yes. So I think that, okay, so first of all, I guess, again, it's no surprise for anyone who has ever read anything I have written on LinkedIn, that I think that corporate sustainability consulting, as it is currently practiced, is completely irrelevant and unprepared to face the urgency and severity of the situation, of the polycrisis, of unfolding collapse scenarios, and is also disinterested in actually addressing the injustices of the current system, right? So that's again the starting point. And I think that it is inevitably going to change. The change will have to address a few levels, like the space itself, understanding its ultimate goal in a different way, understanding its near-term imperatives in a different way, and then obviously developing new or different methods, or adopting different methods. Yes. And so I have mentioned that one way or the other, this space will be disrupted. Yeah, and this is my genuine and strong belief. And this will come from the outer context. One, obviously, we have right now air systems collapsing and ecological tipping points are being hit, which means we are heading towards a cascading domino of horrible catastrophic events. And that will be more and more difficult to ignore, and that will be also more and more affecting businesses and the larger financial system and the economic system, which they already are affecting it now, but it's going to accelerate and accelerate. And second, I have mentioned social tipping points earlier. Those may again be hit at any point where the general public and other stakeholders will just say we are not willing, like enough is enough. We are not willing to put up with things as they are anymore. And this means that it's a question of time when even laggard businesses will awaken to being actually existentially threatened by the situation that we created ourselves, that we are looking at sustaining the business without sustaining the real world on which the business depends, right? And so they will actually really realize that they need radical transformation, they need a systems change for them to survive. And this will have an impact on what they demand, and therefore what sustainability consulting firms offer in terms of value propositions, offerings, and what kind of capabilities they have to develop. And the method I have mentioned earlier is something that, like, I have dropped this word earlier, or this term, sustainability as the world needs. This is a term I have started applying like very recently, also together with Anna Watt, one of my friendly partnering entities. And it is to show, again, kind of coming back to Ikigai, right? Showing the difference between our sustainability as usual, the mainstream, and sustainability adapted to the way that, to what the world needs. And in short, it has like a few differentiating features compared to how we do it now. And one of them is obviously alignment with science, alignment with ethics, looking at its own imperatives through a systems lens, and last, being imbued with business acumen. And at the moment, they are like sustainability and business are completely two worlds, sitting in two separate worlds, and they need to merge in one world. And so shifting towards this kind of practicing sustainability as the world needs, and then guiding businesses to become not business as usual, but become business as the world needs, is really what is eventually going to happen. Yes. And as a very last note, I'm sorry, I know this was a very long answer, but it is also interesting that taking such a big change is obviously difficult for the large consulting firms because of how they are structured. So some of them will definitely not be courageous enough and able to make this kind of transformation, and they will just essentially fade into oblivion. On the other hand, I believe that some of the other ones will. And also it's interesting to kind of realize that some of the ones that are currently small and boutique consulting firms that are already working in transformational ways and may deepen that further, they may become major players. So this might be pretty exciting to watch.
Awesome, thank you. And a totally different question before we conclude the conversation. So we do have a lot of audience who are a lot of young professionals and early to mid-career professionals looking to sort of find careers in this space that create positive impacts. So what kind of advice would you give to aspiring sustainability professionals? When this space itself is emerging so fast and there's so much that needs to happen in this ecosystem, what would be your advice to young professionals?
Thank you. So I will give some advice that is kind of hopefully will help people prepare for what is coming and what is their best course of action. So first of all, obviously, taking a career in sustainability is one of the most meaningful things you can do at this point in time, right? And it's one of the most meaningful career choices you can make, which is amazing. At the same time, there are hundreds of thousands of people around the world who are looking to make the same shift. Yeah, and it's not that there is not demand, that's not the case. There are a lot of jobs obviously opening. And that's also a good thing to realize, that because of the scarcity of talent, maybe you have more agency than you realize. You can be making tougher demands on employers than you realize. But don't be surprised if the job you're hired for is not really a job of changing the world, no matter what the JD said and what the website said. Yes. And because that's the vast majority of the jobs that are out there right now. Yeah. And what you should take away from this is that it is your choice and a possibility and opportunity and a responsibility to actually shape the job, to actively participate in the transformation of corporate sustainability and corporate sustainability consulting, in shifting it from what it is now to what I call sustainability as the world needs. Yes.
Thank you so much. That's a great advice, because a lot of the suggestions that we have from a lot of other quarters of the space is mostly around finding the relevant certifications or finding the relevant skills and all of that. But we don't often talk about fundamentally how do you look at the whole space and like what you need to have in terms of your mindset and all of that. Yeah, I think thank you so much for the advice. And I think, yeah, I think this, then we come to the end of the conversation. Thank you so much, Alice, for your time and sharing all your views. I hope this will be useful for our audience who would like to understand more about what corporate sustainability holds for our future, and like how this space is emerging and what careers exist in this space. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you for having me. Thank you for the courageous questions.